Alhamdulillah wa salatu wasalam ala Rasulullah. I'd like to thank you all for attending. I actually wanted to go off the cuff a bit, being that I've worked in media, so I know exactly how this game is played, and I'm going to give some insight, personal experiences, inshallah, to make things clear for the listeners, for the audience, as to how media is actually used. You guys want to grab Mexican after the talk? Okay, no laughter? No problem. We can edit that in later on. We can always add audience laughter. The point I'm trying to make is that largely what we see is manipulated. There's no such thing as chance. Whenever an event or whenever a production is taken on, it involves ADs, directors, producers, cameramen, the ACs and the DPs and so on and so forth. You have your editors and post-production, script writers. So there's so many people involved that shows you how much effort is put into the most minute detail. So for us to think that once the camera is turned on, people will say whatever comes to their mind is nonsense. It's not that way. It never will be that way, because of the driving factors behind media, the forces that control media. America likes to boast and talk about freedom of expression and so on and so forth, but the truth of the matter is that being in front of a camera is a responsibility, and sometimes whenever there is something of substance that's being discussed, it could have consequences that they don't want to deal with. So America tries to control whatever opinions or ideas that are propagated for fear of dissent and to utilize it for whatever agenda they have. So we need to understand that, is there a bias in media? No. The proper way to look at it, it's clearly policy. Even when we look on the domestic front, we find that media is divided between, the Democrats and Republican. So everybody has their own agenda that they're trying to push, and those agendas have restrictions too that come along with them. There's not just, they can't just say anything that comes to their mind. It has to be in line with whatever policy or agenda that they submit to. And that's where the producers come in, and again, the director has to push out that vision that the producers ultimately want, and most importantly, the financiers, because everything costs money. I got a bottle of water here. I actually took the label off. Had we been making money off of this segment, then I would have been able to reach out to merchandisers and say, hey, I'm going to give a talk. How much are you going to pay me to promote your product? So again, money, 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 and of course politics drives whatever agenda is brought to the table. So when we think of Islamophobia, we need to understand that currently there are no contenders to capitalism. It's us. We're the only ones that are standing up to this bully. We are the only ones calling them out. We are the only ones offering an alternative. In the past, communism was in much a similar situation in which it was demonized and its characters were depicted as also scary figures and so on and so forth, and the enemies of humanity, which again, we're not, kuffar, and the kuffar systems obviously are oppressive to man, but that was the opponent of that time. Now it's Islam. And the best way to eliminate that discussion from taking place is to create this monster, this hairy, scary, incoherent other, so that the focus is on the person and not the content or what he has to say. So again, these are very well-crafted images, and yes, this is policy, and there's no bias whatsoever. Now, when we sit there and look at reporters, after the Gulf War, there was an alignment that took place between the Pentagon, the State Department, in news, largely, and then it spilled over into all segments of media, in which Americans don't care really about what goes on outside of their homes, let alone, more recently they started caring about what goes on domestically on a more larger scale, but internationally, very little knowledge of what goes on in the world. So one of the things they did after the Gulf War is the news reporter took on an approach that was similar to a sports commentator, in which he engaged the American public into war, and rather than the war being focused upon what the soldiers have to say about war, or what the others, the oppressed have to say about America's foreign policy. It became more about the character or the personality of the reporter. So people were in tune with him. Our on-the-hour coverage of what's going on in Iraq, and then again, you had us versus them, the good old boys versus these ragheads or whatever, or hajis is the term that a lot of the soldiers coming back from Iraq used to describe, or from Afghanistan used to describe us, hajis. So it became similar to a football event or a basketball event. And what that ultimately did is it re-engaged the American public into America's foreign policy to some extent. They personalized it, and they began to view it like a competition, a game, and now they were cheerleaders, and they were championing on, obviously, those who they were familiar with. They weren't really looking into the details of, or the injustice. They were looking at more, who do we relate to? And that's it, and that's as far as it's gone. Now, with this whole campaign to demonize Muslims and to tie terrorism to Islam, we've seen how the media has spun it in so many different ways. The only time the word terrorism is used is if it's used to describe a Muslim. In the recent Finsbury attack, the guy was a lone wolf. He was depressed. He was unemployed. So he had a story, a sob story. So you kind of felt, I'm sure some of these people probably somehow tried to justify, oh, he was upset. They were probably in his way. It was just a bad judgment call at that moment, whatever it may be. But when it's a Muslim, forget it. That's a totally different response that you get from the media. And again, these images that the West tries to push in the minds of its viewers are for a purpose that serves not only domestic policies, but foreign policies. So, they can now spy on Muslims, and, they're justified. They can go out there and kill us because, again, we're all hell-bent on killing them. And this is exactly the response that they want. Now, I mentioned in a previous talk the whole issue of San Bernardino. San Bernardino, what was interesting is that they had a walkthrough through one of the houses, and they were sitting there trying to make Americans participant in this whole effort to uncover the terrorists in the neighborhood. And I remember that walkthrough, and I was laughing to myself because there was a scene where they went into the crib and there was like probably a good 100 stuffed dolls. And the only thing that was going through my mind is they sent out an email saying, get some toys, and they had so many different people bring toys that day that eventually, they ended up with 100 toys in a little crib. But again, what I'm trying to say is that once the camera comes on, it's not a true depiction of what is on the ground. It is manufactured. I'll give you an example. I was working with some people on a show, and I remember during the interviewing, we asked one guy, we're like, is there anything that you can relate to, that you can compare to the story of the people of the cave? And he said, yeah, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I found out that Mubarak was disposed. And he's like, I can kind of identify with the story of the people of the cave. And I remember the producers were like, no, we're not going to go with that. We have to eliminate that piece, and they took that comment, very innocent, said by a very, humble man, and they refused to even air it because of the fact that that word to them had so much more behind it, He was sitting there talking about an injustice that was absent, from his life the moment he woke up, and he was able to identify practically with the story of the people of the cave, so they refused to go with it. So again, the idea that media is biased towards Muslims, they're biased towards a certain type of Islam, okay? Or I'm sorry, let's not say biased. They have a policy against a certain type of Islam. It is the comprehensive, ideological Islam. It is the Islam that stands up and challenges, that offers solutions. But the Muslimah who wears the American flag on her head and calls it a hijab, or the gay Muslim, or or sheikhs that are giving Obama, foot massages or whatever. These types of people, these defeated types of Muslims, they'll give them airtime because again, they want that apologetic person that justifies the narrative, that plays along with it. We're sorry, we're sorry, we're sorry. Not somebody who calls them to account for what they're doing abroad. Not somebody who actually offers Islam in its total as a total package, they want that person that plays in line with their agenda and just continues to apologize. Because again, even when they draw up their questions or they produce their shows, everything is calculated. Every single detail is calculated. And this is the angle that I want to go with. Now, the West has long depicted itself as a savior of humanity, you know, the force that's civilizing the savage. If you grew up in the 80s, what do we have back then? I think it was Rambo, Chuck Norris, Sylvester Stallone. You had this, you had all, you know, America was just going out there beating up on the bad guy, even Superman. And I know there's an article that I came across, I didn't go into much detail about it, where the CIA was actually behind a lot of movies. One of them is The Enemy of the State, and Transformers, and so on and so forth. Again, things that give this illusion that America is far more powerful than it really is. Give this image that America actually cares about the others, when in reality it doesn't. And all of this is done in order to win the battle of hearts and minds. So when they sit there and they beat up a poor little girl in some other part of the world with their drones, and then they come clean her up and put her in front of the camera and talk about, hey, she finally learned how to use deodorant and brush her teeth because of our efforts. They're showing you that one side, okay? They're not showing you all the underpinnings, everything that actually led to this girl being in this situation. They're showing you the angle that actually serves, again, their agenda and helps them in pushing or disseminating, spreading their values. So again, everything that we see is controlled, and it's controlled by a handful of people. Now, media is not, I can't go out there and make a movie and get the exposure that I want. For the cheapest movie out there, an independent, you're probably looking at a couple $1 million. Somebody's going to have to promote that, and when they or finance that. When they do finance that, there's also the issue of distribution. Who's going to distribute it? Where am I going to get the, the personalities and so on and so forth? So there's so many different variables involved. And that is why when we look at who largely controls media, we find that it boils down to, I think, 6 or 7 companies that are in bed with the government, in bed with these policy centers, in bed with the State Department and the Pentagon. So, whatever they want, they'll give them. They'll give them an open check. With Zero Dark 30, you had the State Department and the Department of Defense behind movies like that. With 24, again, you had the Pentagon behind a lot of those scripts that were written. Homeland, and so on and so forth. So Islamophobia, okay, is not going anywhere. Let us get that out of our heads. If you've sat there and played any video game lately, or obviously TV shows, books, and so on and so forth, if anything, Muslims are getting uglier and uglier. Intentionally, the media is depicting them as being scarier and uglier and incoherent and so on and so forth. So the idea that we're going to get a podium to do other than apologize is nonsense. That's not going to happen. They want us, at the end of the day, to sink to their level. They want us to stand up and reflect their values. They want us to be the ones who, if we do get a chance to be in front of the camera, to speak to the Ummah on their behalf and to promote Western values, secular, liberal values, not Islam. This is what they want. They'll give you the mic if you have a beard and a turban and all that, as long as you say what aligns with their agenda. But to get out there and actually stand up and challenge, then that's not going to happen, and we need to forget about it happening anytime soon. That requires a state. That truly requires a state that is independent, and media, at the end of the day, we have to remember, is the mouthpiece of that state, okay? It's going to convey whatever ideas and values the state is made of. So to believe that you, on an individual level, can truly dent an agenda that is embraced by the US or the UK or whoever is nonsense. The only thing you can do, okay, is to step up your game, your da'wah game. Talking about public opinion, talk to anybody and everyone, because that's all you can do. You're not going to get no airplay, but what you can do is immediately impact those within your circle. Social media is one of those things that they're trying right now to suppress and to prevent from, prevent us from being able to truly utilize for our own advantage. And that was one of those things that frustrated Hillary Clinton. She was, she was really looking at ways in which she can silence the dissent that was on social media. So social media, in the meantime, you can use in order to spread true ideas about Islam and so on and so forth. So again, we need to understand that they don't care about us. They're not going to give us a mic and expect us to speak truthfully about Islam. They're going to control it to the best of their ability. I remember back in the days we had a public access channel, and we put up a speech that ruffled some feathers, and I came back in, and the channel said, "Oh, the tape has been confiscated." Confiscated for what? It wasn't promoting anything that that would be deemed as violent or threatening, but there were ideas there that they didn't like hearing, so they confiscated the tape. And they actually said that the only way to get it is to go through a whole procedure, which we didn't follow through at the time. I remember another incident where they actually had Channel 9 News, I think, from Chicago, and they came out there and they were asking questions. And I remember the interview was like, so King Hussein died at that time. So what are your views about the new king, And they kept picking at the question until they got it down to something that they could use to somehow interpret it as praise for the dying king, Rather than take the whole soundbite in which it was clearly stating that these, are agents of the West, and whether X or Y is in power, it makes no difference. Maybe one was more politically savvy and that's it. But they cut it down to reflect exactly what it is that they want to reflect, because they had an agenda already defined, and they wanted to make sure that whatever soundbite they get falls in line with that agenda. So again, there's not going to be a balance. The billions of dollars that's at the disposal of Disney, Viacom, TCI, General Electric, and Sony is not something that individuals can possess. And even if they did possess, chances are that they're already in the camp of the capitalists and secularists. So don't expect media to sit there and give you a platform and tell you, go ahead and talk about this. And understand that the source of this hostility is ideological, okay? It is ideological. This is not about Jews controlling the media. This is not about Christians controlling the media. Okay? This is about kufr values, okay, that use the media in a way that serves the agenda of the time. So to think that you as a Muslim can go in there and change the game is not going to happen. And that's why an independent platform, okay, a state that carries these values will give us the opportunity to use media in the way that it was meant to be used, to deliver people from darkness and into light, to speak truth, to expose injustices, to spread the truthfulness of Islam and its values, and so on and so forth. So rather than sitting there and thinking that, every time an inflammatory remark is made, we have to go out there and apologize or condemn it, it's going to really dent their plan. It's not. At the end of the day, the best that we can do is continue our da'wah to every single person. And if by some chance we do come across an independent platform, okay, understand its limitations in the scheme of things. Don't put too much hope into it. The only hope you have is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in reclaiming your way of life and reestablishing your system and speaking the haqq wherever you may be, and fearing not the consequences. So I think I pretty much covered it in a very high-level manner. So if there's any questions, more detailed questions about production, I'll be more than happy to answer, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I wish I were young and could live up to the time when your people would turn you out. The Prophet ﷺ asked, "Will they drive me out?" Waraqah replied in the affirmative and said, "Anyone who came with something similar to what you have brought was treated with hostility. And if I should remain alive till the day when you will be turned out, then I would support you strongly. These were the words of Warqa ibn Nawfal, the cousin of Khadija radiallahu anha, shortly after the Prophet ﷺ was given the first revelation. If we take some time to reflect on these words and look at the seerah, we can clearly see Islamophobia is not a new phenomenon. Social media has helped in making everyone aware about Islamophobia with incidents as of late. And as incidents occur, but people and Muslims in particular need to realize that this has always existed. This statement may be a bit blunt for some, but it is the reality nonetheless. Our Prophet ﷺ and our Sahabas and the early reverts to Islam faced Islamophobia in all facets. Inshallah, today I will be discussing the topic of Islamophobia then and now. I will inshallah today hit on a few incidents in our history that illustrate how Islamophobia has been around since the inception of Islam. Furthermore, I will discuss the current climate and how, as Muslims, we can move forward. As I have said before, and will reiterate again, Islamophobia is not a new phenomenon. It has been around since Islam's inception. The Prophet ﷺ faced many obstacles and incidents in the years he resided in Mecca after giving the first revelation. Even prior to that, he was always known as an honest man who always spoke the truth. He was well respected and liked amongst Quraysh. When the Prophet ﷺ took to the public for the first time, he gathered all of Quraysh and asked, "If I were to tell you there was an enemy horseman on the other side of this mountain and they were about to attack you in the morning or towards the evening, would you believe me?" In unison, they all replied, "Yes, we affirm your honesty because we have not seen anything to suggest otherwise. You are not a person who makes false allegations." The Prophet ﷺ responded by warning them of the great punishment that lies ahead. In that great punishment, he was referring to the hellfire. He invited everyone to say, "Allah is one, and there is no God but He. I am His servant and messenger. If you accept what I have said, then I guarantee that you will enter heaven." Abu Jahl, baffled in the face of these words that addressed the mind, heart, and soul, took a rock in his hand and threw it towards the Prophet ﷺ and shouted, "May you perish for this. Is this what you have summoned us for here?" At this point, many people dispersed and went about their day as normal. I bring up this first incident to highlight the fact of how the climate was in Quraysh at that time. The people of Quraysh were polytheistic. They were idol worshippers who were perplexed by the threat of Islam, which contradicted the religion of Quraysh at the time. Some early revelations of the Quran clearly addressed their kufr beliefs and questioned their actions, such as, "Why do you hoard your wealth? And why do you bury your daughters alive?" and the like. This ultimately created a climate of fear amongst the ruling elite in Quraysh, whether it was persecution, torture, boycotts, and or killing. The early Muslims faced it. All because the ruling elite was threatened with a new religion that made all believers equal regardless of their color. It went against the religion of their forefathers, which was heavily looked down upon during the time. Did you know Sumayya radiallahu anha was the first martyr in Islam? She also happens to be the first Muslim killed due to Islamophobia, as she would not give up her new beliefs in Islam. Therefore, she was killed after many days of torture by Abu Jahl. Many Muslims were persecuted and tortured, in which some early Muslims ended up making hijrah to Abyssinia. You would think it would have been enough for some Muslims to make hijrah and leave Mecca, but lo and behold, the elites of Quraysh sent a delegation to Abyssinia to force the Muslims to come back by trying to court the Najas, the king of Abyssinia at the time, but they failed. Fast forward a few years later, And now you have the Prophet ﷺ himself and the Muslims of Makkah making hijrah to Medina. They made this hijrah as well to escape persecution, just like the group of Muslims who made hijrah to Abyssinia. But this hijrah was a bit different, as this hijrah led to the establishment of the Islamic State, led by the Prophet ﷺ himself. The next incident I want to touch on is the incident dealing with Banu Qaynuqa. Banu Qaynuqa were one of the three main Jewish tribes living in Medina prior to the establishment of the Islamic State. They had a peace treaty after they agreed to the conditions set forth by the Prophet ﷺ in the Constitution of Medina. And just a couple years later, the tribe of Banu Qaynuqa were found violating the peace treaty and were expelled from the land. The incident which led to their expulsion is what I want to highlight. A Muslim woman was visiting some shops in the Qaynuqa marketplace when a goldsmith belonging to the tribe pinned her clothes down from behind, which upon getting up, she was stripped naked. A Muslim man coming upon the resulting commotion killed the guy in retaliation. A mob from the tribe of Qaynuqa then pounced on the Muslim man and killed him. This incident alone resulted in a chain of revenge killing, which led to the tribe violating the Constitution of Medina and the peace treaty they had. My main purpose in this talk was to highlight some past incidents of Islamophobia before and after Hijrah. I specifically chose these incidents as I feel we can learn something from them. We see today, mainly due to social media, various incidents of Islamophobia, whether it is verbal abuse, similar to how the Prophet ﷺ faced it when he first proclaimed the message openly. Whether it is being killed just like Sumayyah radiallahu anha, whether it is making hijrah because you are being persecuted, and lastly, whether it is having your honor stripped, literally and figuratively, as in the incident with Banu Qaynuqa. As you can see, as I mentioned before and remind you again, Islamophobia has always existed and it is not a new phenomenon. The current climate of Islamophobia is similar to that when the message was first revealed. Islam and Muslims are both attacked directly and indirectly, from within and from the outside. So the way forward, what is it? Simple. At the end of the day, you do not waver in the face of adversity, similar to the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahabas. We should all be proud to be Muslims and hold that with us in high regards by staying steadfast on this deen, similar to Sumayyah radiallahu anha and Bilal ibn Rabah radiallahu anhu, who, when being extremely tortured for days upon days by his master Umayyah to give up his religion, would reply, Ahad and Ahad, God is one, God is one. Later, when asked why he would repeat Ahad and Ahad when being tortured, he said it used to upset Umayyah more, it would make him happy. The Prophet and the Sahabas faced Islamophobia, and he ﷺ was the best man, and they, the Sahabas, were the best group of Muslims ever. The Prophet ﷺ left us with a blueprint and a way forward to deal with Islamophobia. Although it will likely never stop, we can see the difference in the incidents alone when you examine his life and the life of the Muslim Ummah collectively in Mecca versus Medina. The incidents involving Islamophobia were severely deterred once they were in Medina as opposed to before. Think why. I encourage everyone to seek knowledge. Educate yourself and closely examine the Seerah to understand the blueprint that Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam left behind. I will conclude with this abbreviated ayat of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, so relate the stories, perhaps they may reflect. Jazakallah khair.